What if we were not alone? What if the hundreds of thousands of people claiming to have seen unidentified flying objects in fact had been witnessing extraterrestrial spacecraft? What if the thousands of people all over the world who tell about their encounters with alien beings through friendly contact or even forced abductions were actually telling the truth? What if our governments had known about an ET presence for more than half a century? If they were in possession of alien technology that had the potential of changing how our world is run, and they chose to keep the public in the dark through a secret campaign of suppressed information? What if that campaign acted as a chain around the ankles of humanity, keeping us from rising to a whole new level of consciousness and understanding of ourselves, our planet, and the universe around us? And what if that campaign ended tomorrow?
It's one of these currents of history that won't be denied. The truth is going to come out, and when it does, it's going to be explosive.
So once we get that out, we will go back and completely reassemble the 20th century, rewrite it in a way, and may have to go back and rewrite a significant portion of the entire last 12,000 years.
This is the greatest story in human history. And the reason it is the greatest story in human history, it is the greatest story of human history.
The worldview portrayed in this statement by renowned scientist Lord Kelvin in 1900 was shattered only 5 years later when Albert Einstein published his groundbreaking paper on special relativity. The new theories challenged the current framework of understanding and forced the scientific community to open up to a broader view on the nature of reality. This event of fundamental change, this paradigm shift, came as a huge surprise to scholars at that time. But today we have no problem following the string of breakthroughs leading up to Einstein's paper and the doorway into the atomic age. Lord Kelvin's statement bears with it the voice of paradigms past. We knew that the Earth was flat. We knew that we were the center of the universe. And we knew that a man-made heavier-than-air piece of machinery could not take flight. Through all stages of human history, intellectual authorities have pronounced their supremacy by ridiculing or suppressing elements of reality that simply didn't fit within the framework of accepted knowledge. The so-called father of modern science, the Italian astronomer Galileo, was even convicted by the Catholic Church and placed under house arrest for life after publishing a book where he supported the idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe. His work was then banned and forbidden for more than 200 years. But are we really any different today? Have we really changed our acceptance towards the things that won't fit the frame? Maybe there are concepts of our reality we have yet to understand. And if we open our eyes, maybe we will see that something significant has been overlooked.
My name's Nick Pope. I worked for the Ministry of Defence, part of the British government, for 21 years, and for much of the early 90s I was responsible for running their UFO project. The Ministry of Defence has been investigating UFO sightings since the 1950s and has about 12,000 reports in its case files. When I was doing the job in the 90s, I received about 200 or 300 reports each year.
In May 2008, the British government opened its first batch of UFO files for public inspection. The release, made available on the internet, created an immense media and public interest, with over 2 million downloads the first weeks. Other nations had just recently opened their files, and more were to follow. France, Belgium, Ireland, Denmark, Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. The most amazing stories were revealed of craft, UFO fleets, landings, and even ET entities being seen, often with multiple eyewitnesses involved. Even if many of the reports could be explained as aircraft, weather balloons, satellites, or planets, or special weather phenomena, still a large portion remained unexplained.
It is clear to me, given that these things are seen by police officers, pilots, military personnel, given that they are sometimes tracked on radar, it is clear to me that whatever the UFO phenomenon involves, there are serious defence, national security and air safety issues at stake.
The question if we are alone in the universe is as old as man himself, but now this question seems to be more pressing than ever. Today, science has discovered that many of our neighboring stars have similar planet systems. Over 500 planets have been registered so far. Some scientists even claim that our galaxy alone may have billions of planets with Earth-like conditions. So the idea of us humans being the only intelligent life in the universe seems to be losing its grip. Over the years, polls have shown that a rising number of people believe in intelligent life elsewhere. In many countries, far more than 50% of the population. This question of extraterrestrial life was also among the reasons why the SETI project was established back in the 1980s. SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This project, still ongoing, is using large radio telescopes at several locations on the globe to scan the cosmos in search for electromagnetic transmissions that could indicate intelligent life. This is the radio telescope in Bologna in Italy, one of the largest of its kind in Europe. This enormously complex system of antennas is able to detect even the weakest signals from the universe. And by interpreting these signals, the scientists are able to learn a lot about the age and the origin of the stars, the galaxies, and the universe. And perhaps also detect signals from intelligent life.
What we are looking for actually is not really a particular kind of signal. We are just searching for something different from the normal cosmic noise, so to say. So we are not searching for a particular transmission signals, but for example it would be enough to detect some signals coming from their communications, televisions, if they do have televisions, or cellular telephones or things like that. Well, we have recorded a huge amount of data so far, but unfortunately we could not get any signal yet.
But has the research been done for the right type of signals? While we are looking for answers inside the framework of our old paradigm, civilizations maybe several million years ahead of us in technological sophistication may not transmit our type of radio signals at all. The most commonly used argument against interstellar travel is the fact that even our closest neighboring stars are several light years away. We have to move 20, 30 or maybe 50 light years out to find a substantial number of stars where life may be possible. With such distances and the speed of light as a limit, the thought of being visited from outside has seemed impossible. But new developments in physics have redefined Einstein's relativity theory and opened for a new view on this question.
According to hydraulic mechanics, there is no problem with space travel and not even with time travel. The equations and the physical models, concepts and relations for explaining this has been clear for more than 10 years in advanced hydraulic mechanics.
So if there are civilizations thousands or millions of years ahead of us, distances within 100 light years may not be a big obstacle. And is this why mysterious unidentified flying objects have been reported all over the globe through centuries? What really made the UFO phenomenon known to the public was what happened here in Washington in the summer of 1952, when a series of UFO observations were made during a period of 2 weeks. Objects were traced on radar flying 1,000 miles per hour, and they suddenly executed a 90-degree turn and other maneuvers that no aircraft could do even today.
Military pilots were launched to chase these objects. They got close enough to them to see they were round balls of light or oval balls of light, but they could not catch them.
It forced the Air Force to have a press conference on this. What is going on? And during the press conference, the General Samford, who was in charge of Air Force intelligence, basically argued that as far as he was concerned, it was all natural phenomena and then there wasn't anything to worry about. So the press, being satisfied with that, publicized, it was all weather and temperature inversions and weather phenomena that were causing these sightings, and you could forget all about them. A Navy officer who was working in the Air Force intelligence told an FBI person that several percent of the sightings could not be explained, and that the top Air Force people, some of them were seriously considering interplanetary ships as the explanation.
The pilot Kenneth Arnold had already in 1947 introduced the name flying saucers when he claimed to have come upon a formation of 9 unusual saucer-like objects near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington in June that year. Before this, pilots of World War II bombers had named them Foo Fighters. These smaller discs were frequently seen as rapid lights crossing over German, Japanese, and Allied territories, sometimes right next to the aircraft, as if monitoring their operations. On the night of February 24, 1942, only 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, several unidentified objects were picked up on radar over the city of Los Angeles. It was believed to be another Japanese attack and resulted in an intense searchlight activity and heavy artillery fire.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area.
But the presumed enemy never fought back, and suddenly the objects disappeared without trace. During the 50s, flying saucers were reported repeatedly, also by civil and military pilots.
And I could see that it was a black lenticular form, so silhouette with these blinking lights all over the surface. And it was at least twice the size of a 747, like 2 Boeing 747 airliners nose to tail. And it's between me and Indianapolis, so I rolled around and tried to get on its tail and behind it, and it turned about 30-degree angles to the north and headed straight for Chicago, and then went over the horizon like that and disappeared. There's no airplane can go that fast.
And over the entrance to Pearl Harbor area, it's the entrance there with either 9. I said 9 discs originally, so I'm going to keep it that way. With 9 discs, white, perfectly white, and they were doing all kinds of different formations: a V, opposite L, reversed L, different types. We watched them for about 15 minutes. Then finally, they're off. It's gone.
In 1952, orders were issued to military pilots in the United States shoot them down, flying saucers, if they don't land when instructed to do so. They have the newspaper articles proving that. Matter of fact, the head of the American Rocket Society wrote a letter to President Truman saying he didn't think that was a good idea. Not a good way to welcome anybody coming here.
The American jet fighter pilot Milton Torres, stationed at the Manson RAF base in Britain, was on May 20th, 1957, ordered to go after and shoot down a large UFO spotted on radar hovering over Ipswich. This enormous object, the size of an aircraft carrier, disappeared into the sky at the very instant he was to launch his rockets.
I was thinking that if I fired this thing that he may vaporize me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was not of this earth. It was not a man-made object. This was something that was... They could stop. They could absolutely stand still, and they could go Mach 10 or more at any time. And a human being would be splashed up against the sidewall from the forces of just the momentum forces. That would destroy you. So it was nothing that we humans know anything about.
But many, many pilots in military planes who were ordered to go after and shoot down discs, they either disappeared or their planes crashed. This is another underbelly of this whole phenomenon. And before he died, Len Stringfield, who was the very first on the planet who had the courage to start publicly reporting that not only were there beautiful lights in the sky that moved in erratic patterns, but they were clearly involved with crash retrieval stories that were coming to him from military people who would not go on the record, that we were retrieving bodies, we were retrieving technology. And Len Stringfield said, Linda, I know firsthand that our government had a standing policy to take these discs down out of the sky until we had lost so many pilots that order was rescinded around 1953 to 54.
Books were now appearing on UFOs, with pictures of saucers and cigar-shaped craft on close range, even with people claiming to have met the visitors in person. And soon the entertainment industry also joined the saucer wave. This somehow influenced on the image of the UFO issue, giving skeptics further reason for ridicule of the phenomenon. On July 1947, a major incident occurred near Roswell, New Mexico, the place where the U.S. manufactured and stored its newly developed nuclear weapons. A flying saucer is reported to have crashed.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
The incident is revealed in the local newspaper, but withdrawn the day after. Weather balloons is the official explanation. Today, several military and civil eyewitness testimonials have surfaced concerning both the crash itself and the crash retrieval operations, indicating that it most probably was a vehicle of unknown origin. Apollo astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon and also grew up as a Roswell resident, has recently gone public with his view on this controversial incident.
I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, which was the site of presumed alien crash in 1947, and which, from what I call the testimony of the old-timers who were there and who had been hushed up by government authority, military authority, almost on pain of death at the time, and who had harbored their knowledge quietly for years, that when I came back from the moon, and I was a local boy, they considered me safe enough to tell their story to, that they were a part of the recovery effort and the observer of the so-called Roswell crash, and that they knew for sure that it was an alien craft. And subsequent sightings, subsequent evidence has reaffirmed all of that we are being visited and have been visited by alien spacecraft and alien beings. And our governments around the world have covered it up.
In response to this escalating UFO activity and public awareness, in September, 2 months after the Roswell crash, Project Grunge, later named Project Blue Book, was established by the U.S. Air Force as an official investigative body in UFO cases. The project collected civil and military reports and carried out an analysis of them. In 1969, after 22 years, the project was closed, without reaching official conclusion. And that ended, to this day, the official comments from the U.S. government on the UFO issue. But the UFO sightings didn't end. Going back to 1963, a command sergeant major in the U.S. Army was assigned to the supreme headquarters of Allied powers in Europe, in Paris, France, and was given the highest top-secret clearance. The story revealed to him there puts the phenomenon into a whole new perspective.
And when I arrived in the summer of 1963, my clearance was upgraded to cosmic top secret, which was then and still is today the highest level of classification in NATO. And when I arrived in the summer of '63, I learned of a study that was underway that had been initiated in 1961. Apparently, an event had occurred on the morning of 2nd February 1961 that almost triggered World War III. A large number of circular metallic discs flying in formation flew out of the Soviet sector over the Allied sector and had divided Germany, flew off to the west. They turned north over the Channel, over the English Channel, over the southern coast of England, and then they turned north and disappeared off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea, off the coast of Norway. Well, this incident almost triggered World War III because the Soviets, we found out, thought those objects belonged to us. And for a time we thought they might belong to the Soviets. We were to find out that they didn't belong to either of us, the Soviets or us, that it was a real story here. And they initiated a study in '61 to determine what in the world is happening here. They concluded after this 3-year study that the planet Earth and the human race apparently had been under some kind of survey or observation for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, by several extraterrestrial advanced intelligences. Now that literally, Terry, blew me out of the water.
This document, called an assessment, an evaluation of possible threat to Allied forces in Europe, was a secret NATO report on UFOs, distributed in 15 copies in the NATO system. Could that indicate that NATO at that time was fully aware of the UFO and ET presence?
The U.S. military took UFOs very, very seriously all through the Cold War and indeed beyond. We have a fair amount of evidence, documentation, military documents, intelligence documents, that show very clearly that the U.S. military encountered objects that did not seem normal, did not look normal, and had extraordinary behavior, violating sensitive airspace, again and again and again. So the question is not, do UFOs exist? The question is, who do they belong to? And indeed, guess what? This was exactly the question I discovered that U.S. military analysts asked. They were no dummies. So they knew there's only a couple of possibilities here. Question number one, back in the 40s and 50s, was, are these Soviet devices? In the context of the Cold War, that's important. You need to find out. Did the Soviets come up with a revolutionary type of propulsion and so forth? Well, they looked into it, and the answer did not seem to be yes. It looked like it was a no. And indeed, that seems to be the answer today. So then question number two is this a secret project that we're doing somewhere in the bowels of the American military complex? That's a fair question. It's entirely possible, but again, it's also possible that that isn't the answer. And indeed, a lot of the evidence doesn't seem to point that way. The fact, for example, that our jet fighters were chasing these objects again and again is one thing that points to that. If it was a secret American project, why continually, year after year, scramble your own military to chase them down? So then there's a third option, and in the context of the late 1940s, it was, are they interplanetary spaceships? That was really the only other option people could think of at the time. And guess what? There were many analysts from the 1940s and all throughout the period that we can get any information on this, that yes, there were many people who argued that this was the case.
Incredible stories continue to happen.
The most interesting of those cases occurred in November of 1965. There were UFO reports in New York State, all over New England, of objects being sighted above power lines, over power plants, over power relay stations. I forget the gentleman's name, but one of the FAA regional directors was flying in a private plane near Syracuse, New York, and they saw a large fiery ball pass over power lines at a place called the Clay Power Substation. And as soon as the object was directly over the lines, from horizon to horizon, all the lights went out as far as this man could see. And initially he thought that he had gone blind temporarily, you know, something had happened, and then he realized that there was no power. And it became what is known as the Great Northeast Blackout.
It's an incredible instance on 17 November 1986 that a Japan Airlines plane that was flying from Tokyo to Paris through Alaska encountered three large shelled walnut type objects. The largest was described intermittently in different reports as either the size of one or two U.S. aircraft carriers. They were pacing the plane, they were making aerodynamic movements which were scaring the pilots. It's an amazing incident in that possible 5 different agencies were all tracking these objects at the same time, namely the FAA, the CIA, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and I presume Japan Airlines when the calls came in. It's one of the most heavily documented cases ever. There's transcripts that come out of the black box that were frightening. It turned out that the Reagan administration was excited about all this because they had never gotten so much documented information on a UFO incident ever in history. So they convened a scientific advisory board that in January was going to study all the information. As far as that scientific advisory committee, John Callahan, who was a senior FAA official, was on top of all this. He was excited too. He had looked all of the data. He said they never had anything this good. The scientific advisory board convened and they were waiting for the meeting to start. And according to Mr. Callahan, before the president even came in, somebody from the CIA came in and snatched everything up and said this never happened and walked out.
The history of UFOs in the United States is it's filled with one impossible sighting after another impossible sighting. The problem with them is that they have great military documentation again and again showing that they actually happened. Or what does one make of the boomerang craft that were seen in just north of New York City in the early 1980s in what's called the Hudson Valley? For several years, you have again and again these enormous objects being seen by thousands of witnesses. They're driving along the highway and they see this object hovering. They get out of their car, their jaws drop open, and this intense bright light shoots down onto the highway like out of a movie. Except this wasn't a movie. This happened many times over a period of, say, 5 years, just north of New York City.
In Great Britain, periods of extensive UFO activity kept the subject warm in the news media. A serving police detective within the UK force in England has over the recent years gathered reports involving over 800 police officers having different UFO encounters. And here is one of the stories.
His name was Police Constable Eric Raymond, and he was a police officer in the Thames Valley Police at the time of this particular sighting. And he was in a rural location in 1979, I believe it was, and he was stood talking with two other police officers, two vehicles parked up middle of the countryside, dark, no street lights or anything, it's just very dark, and they're doing what police officers do at 3 in the morning, have a chat, have a cigarette or whatever. Suddenly in the distance they see a bright light blink on for literally a second. It's a long way off, they look, it blinks off, they don't think anything to it, they just carry on talking. 5 minutes later, this happens. And the object appears in front of them at a distance of about 400 metres, at an altitude of just 500 feet, which is very close, and they describe the object as being the size of a football field, and it is shining a beam down the width of a football field across the landscape and slowly scanning the terrain. They think about going on the police radio and think, nobody's going to believe this. So they don't want the ridicule factor. So they watch for 5 minutes in awe. The object is moving in total silence, and they say there are smaller objects flying silently around the larger silent object. And after 5 minutes, it goes. It doesn't go up, doesn't go left, doesn't go right. It disappears like a light bulb.
The 70s brought an amazing number of UFO reports from the British Isles, but nothing could compare to what was to unfold in late December 1980 at a NATO base in Suffolk, east of London.
The Rendlesham Forest incident is Britain's most famous and compelling UFO encounter. The file on the incident was made public a number of years ago under the Freedom of Information Act, and so the case file's in the public domain, but the bottom line is the case has never been explained.
Peter Robbins spent 9 years doing intensive research for his book, giving a first-hand account of the case. His co-author, Larry Warren, was airman at the base at the time and one of the key eyewitnesses to the event.
It occurred between Christmas and New Year's on 3 consecutive nights, 1980, and it involved overflights above this twin NATO base complex in Suffolk, about 80 miles from London, landings, the shooting down of beams of light into the weapons storage area, which was a nuclear weapons storage area, very much in violation of our treaty with Great Britain at the time. And on the final night of the 3 nights, there was the biggest incident. In this, my co-author, dozens of other American Air Force personnel were taken and brought out to a field near their sister base, RAF Woodbridge, where they saw the appearance of a machine of undetermined origin.
At that place, an object appeared on the ground in the place of a mist. I saw this happen. A red light moved in, exploded. It caused retina and eye damage to a lot of us peripheral people. A structured object was in its place on the ground. Though you couldn't look directly at it, you'd have to look at it with your peripheral vision to get the shape. Entities were seen. How many? 3. Looking very translucent, not your what they call gray, and all that sort of thing. It was almost ghost-like. Very much animated, self-animated though. That whole event was filmed.
Did they walk out of the craft?
They didn't.
Did
Well,
just
no.
appear?
They
What
were
craft?
floating about a foot above the ground in a very bright light. The lower extremities were very hard to see. They were a foot off the ground.
They were about 4 feet tall. They had that same large cranial structure, the giant black sweeping eyes, almost no nose, a hint of a mouth. and they were each dressed in a suit, very tight-fitting, and they were slightly translucent, and they were floating. So they got in about 5 feet from the thing. They were right there. And the beings were no further away than like 20 feet or so from Larry. So this was all happening in extremely close proximity, very close up. Larry and other men there observed, besides the dozens of American enlisted Air Force personnel, many of them like Larry with secret clearances because they worked around nuclear weapons. But there were British police officers on location. They were from the nearby village of Woodbridge. And while the American Air Force personnel were filming this with video, and this is 1980, so you could spot a video camera a long ways away. It was very bulky, but also regular film cameras. One of these police officers was taking photographs of this landed machine with a 35mm camera. And from what I understand, the Air Force confiscated this camera from the police officer, which caused a bit of a fight. When these beings appeared, they looked at the human beings, and the human beings looked at them. And no hands were shaken, no things were exchanged. If anybody heard voices in their heads, I don't know about this. And at a certain point, these beings, they did not open a door and walk in, but they disappeared. And the sense was they had gone back in. The machine then lifted up. It was making a slight humming sound, my best description. It angled slightly and then, and it was a star, you know, in a matter of seconds, and it was gone. What happened the next day is almost more upsetting to me, namely that these men were debriefed. I think they were told a combination of truths and lies to overwhelm them, intimidate them, keep them quiet. And then that night, a number of the individuals, Larry and Adrian Bustinza next to him included, were taken against their wills, subdued chemically, and put through a series of procedures to confuse and upfuse their thinking, and were released a day or so later, right before New Year's.
3 years later, this incredible story had leaked to the media and created a long succession of headlines as more and more information was revealed from different sources, Larry himself being one of the main sources. But no official comments on the UFO incident were given from either the US or the British government. All the unique film and video material, including the pictures taken by the British policemen, were removed from the base by the US military, never to be seen again. In 2009, Larry King and CNN shed new light on the case by bringing in new eyewitnesses confirming the story of the first night of the sightings.
I was there on the first night. I went off base to check out a possible aircraft downing. I thought it was an aircraft crash, and I took my team with me, and when we got to the wooded line off the east gate, we discovered a craft of unknown origin. It was triangular in shape.
On the ground?
On the ground.
Did you touch it?
Touched it, walked around it, photographed it. We did a full investigation of it on the ground for 45 minutes.
With this exceptional testimony from a retired U.S. Air Force security officer live on CNN, confirming the story of several other eyewitnesses, you might expect it to lead to some kind of official reaction. Does the Rendlesham case actually tell us straight out that there is another reality in the midst of our lives, able to come and go as it pleases? In other countries, UFO observations were made continuously. In Brazil and the huge Amazon area, UFO and ETs were observed almost on a daily basis.
You know, historically, Brazil is one of the major countries as far as UFO sightings and contacts with aliens is concerned. Now, we have all sorts of cases, and they are spread all over the country. Now, some of the most astounding cases in the UFO history happening in Brazil. We're talking about landings, we're talking about face-to-face contact with aliens, which are getting rare for some reason. And we talking about also sightings with multiple witnesses. Sightings in the middle of the cities, like 2,000 or 3,000 people seeing a UFO.
But what about Russia and the former Soviet Union?
Russian Navy has not been known to reveal its secrets, but Russian Navy has been known to be in the forefront of the UFO and USO research. And we have reports coming basically from all corners of the world, be it the South Georgia Island or the Barents Sea, or for example, especially the Sea of Okhotsk and such lakes like the Lake Baikal. They had encountered not only gigantic underwater objects and submarines who could move at incredible speeds, and the Soviets just could not catch up with them. They had also encountered disks that would basically fly out from under the water, go into the sky, separate into different objects, come back together, fly away. They had encountered a phenomenon which was called kvakery, from the Russian word kvakать, meaning to emit a sound like frogs would do. What it meant is that Soviet submarines, especially in the Atlantic area, would find gigantic moving objects at great depths of the sea. Objects that would emit certain sounds that kind of reminded them of croaking, but there were different sounds. They could do nothing about this, but the Soviets became very nervous because these gigantic objects would accompany them. And of course they thought the Americans came up with a new way to track Soviet submarines. They found out this was not so. And I want to bring your attention to the country I was born in, Ukraine, 1986 Chernobyl phenomenon. Well, I should not call it that, Chernobyl tragedy. What happened is that according to a number of witnesses, when the explosion took place, a UFO, a sphere, a fiery sphere, had been sighted in the area, and it sent a ray of light, of something, towards the area of the explosion to diminish the effects of the nuclear explosion itself.
In 2008, we received over 867 sighting reports from 37 different cities in Turkey, and out of those, 35% of them were documented, and 20%, 15 to 20% of them were unidentified.
In Turkey, one of the most amazing recent cases is from the town Comburgos, an hour away from Istanbul, where a security guard captured astonishing UFO footage over a 3-month period in 2007. The film clearly shows the outline and the structure of the object, and also what seems to be the silhouette of two beings inside. The film has been thoroughly checked by a governmental scientific institution.
In the official report, it says clearly that this is not a hoax at all. This is not a computer-animated hoax or a model or anything like that. There is a physical object in the picture, in the footages, that we could not identify. They categorized them as unidentified flying objects.
Astonishing video has also been released from Mexico. Military gun camera shots of traveling UFOs hit the news in 2004. And even more astonishing, fleets of UFOs were seen and filmed over several cities. As a result of the rising national interest in the UFO issue in Mexico, one of their main broadcasters has run a 2.5-hour show every Sunday night the past 15 years, presenting the latest UFO documentation.
Well, I have a television program every Sunday night from 5:30 to 8 o'clock. It's prime time in the Mexican television. And we present the news around this phenomenon. It means the most recent videos, the most recent photographs, the most recent cases, the investigation behind that, the actuality. Many people in the media and even the public have been brainwashed by the scientists who don't want to investigate this. But there is enough evidence, scientifically proved, based, that can be investigated and presented to the scientists, and they have to accept and agree that this phenomenon is real. There is no question in my mind. I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 40 years. And I know because I've seen them, because I've seen creatures, and because I know it's true.
Behind me here, inside this blue container, is the only stationary, fully automatic 24-hour UFO observatory on the planet. In Norway, the remote mountain valley Hessdalen became world famous after almost continuous observations from the early 80s on. Strange lights moved up and down the mountainsides every night over long periods, just above the treetops. In contrast to many other countries, scientists arrived and established a permanent UFO observatory.
The light phenomena here in Hessdalen in Norway started in late 81, with a lot of sightings. At the most it was 20 sightings a week. The local people here started to see the light down in the valley, sometimes close to their houses, and they was wondering what could this be, and some was a little bit afraid too, because no one could give them any answer. What could it be?
Radar and cameras were soon to pick up astonishing pictures of the unexplained light phenomena. This picture is taken with 1/60th of a second exposure.
The phenomena behaves very different. Some is moving very slowly, and some lights can move very fast. The fastest speed we have ever measured was 30,000 kilometers an hour.
But the local residents claim to have seen more than just lights.
I februar-mars. Og så når jeg kom opp av Hestadslea da, så var det noe mørkt. Men når jeg kom mest opp på toppen, opp på kjøren der som vi sier, der ble det opplyst rundt meg. Det ble opplyst om dagen. Så kom det nå og for over bil. Det var som en opplyst herrehatt. Gammeldags slik stor herrehatt med brem på det. Som for over bil og fremover.
Vi bevitnes på at de har sett dessverre 68 observasjoner. Og det er nedskrevet her.
The observatory shoots pictures automatically every minute and puts them on the internet. Many amazing shots have been captured. After an automatic video recording system was put up, 1 year of waiting passed before the Hessdalen phenomenon is caught on camera. Zooming in and slowing down the film, something really astonishing is revealed. A smaller second light seems to appear from underneath, joining the main light. Is something collected by the light? Landings were also reported, and even solid proof was found of Earth samples being taken in the midst of nowhere. Here, a 2 hours walk from the nearest dirt road, a 2-ton piece of wet turf has been cut out with laser precision, lifted and placed a few meters away. No sign of machinery nor people. During a week in September 2007, a major survey was carried out by the university scientists, assisted by students with several observation units. On the fourth night of the